Today we're going to solve quadratics by taking the square root. So, quadratic equations of the form ax squared equals c can be used to solve square roots using the square root property. X squared equals n. So to solve that, we know that we square root both sides and we get x equals plus or minus the square root of n. Okay, so when I look at this and I ask myself, when do I use this? I use this when we have no b in our standard form. We have our a and our c, but no b. So the first thing we're going to do is isolate our x squared. Then we're going to take the square root of both sides, simplify the radical, and then your answer should include the positive and the negative to indicate both answers. Okay, so our first question here, we need to isolate our variable by doing our inverse operations. So we're going to add 64 to both sides. And that's going to leave us x squared equals 64. Okay, so how can we undo the square? So what's the opposite of squaring? Square root. So now we're going to square root both sides. And then x equals plus or minus 8. Okay, in this case, we need to isolate the x squared. So we're trying to get x squared by itself. So we're going to subtract 8. And then I need to divide by 7. X squared is going to equal 1. Square root both sides. X equals plus or minus 1. Excuse me. Okay, here I'm going to let you try it first. So pause the video and try it and come back and check your answer. So we're going to subtract 5. Divide by 81. Okay, so we can do fractions. We did this in Unit 2. So we're going to square root both sides. And x equals plus or minus the square root of 4 over 9. How'd you do? All right, so let's look at the next one. On these, you can just pause the video, work through them, come back and check your answers, and then see how you're doing on your own. So we're going to subtract 1, divide by 8. Okay, so we get x squared equals 2. When we square root both sides, 2 is not a perfect square. And I can't simplify it, so it will just be plus or minus the square root of 2. Okay, on the next one, we're going to add 9 to both sides. We get 2x squared equals 64. Now, at this point, you may be thinking I'm going to go ahead and square, but our x squared is not by itself yet, so we need to divide by 2. And then we get x squared equals 32. Square root both sides. X equals plus or minus the square root of 32. Now, we learned from Unit 2 that we cannot just leave that as a radical with 32, but we need to simplify that. So we're going to look at our perfect squares. Remember, those are 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, and so on. And ask ourselves which one of those, the largest one, will go into 32, and that will be 16 times 2. And then x equals plus or minus 4 square root of 2. So that simplifying the radicals in Unit 2 is still very important here. Okay, so continuing on, we're going to subtract 3. 9x squared equals 108. Divide by 9. X squared equals 12. Square root both sides. x equals plus or minus the square root of 12. Again, we're going to use our perfect squares to break that down. 4 and 3. So our final answer is 2 square root of 3. Okay, so moving on here to number 7. I hope you're doing well with these and pausing the videos and trying these by yourself. We will have practice in class. So we're going to subtract 4. We get negative 3x squared, excuse me, equals negative 81. Don't forget when you do this problem to bring that negative down with the 3. Okay, that's a common mistake. Divide by negative 3. X squared equals 27. So x equals plus or minus the square root of 27. So we're going to break that 27 down. Hopefully these are easier now than they were in Unit 2, but that's 9 times 3. And that's going to give me plus or minus 3 square root of 3 for my x. Okay, here we're going to subtract 10. And I'm going to get 5x squared equals 300. Divide by 5. X squared equals 60. I'm going to square root both sides. X equals plus or minus the square root of 60. And I'm going to need to break that down. So if you think about that, 4 and 15. And then x equals plus or minus 2 square root of 15. Okay, our last one for the day here, we're going to subtract 1. I get negative 1/2 x squared equals negative 40. Now at this point you can divide by half, or if you remember you can multiply by the reciprocal, which in this case would be negative 2. So I get x squared equals 80. And then we're going to square root, x squared equals plus or minus the square root of 80. And so then you're asking yourself which perfect square will go into 80. And so that's going to be the square root of 16 times 5. So plus or minus 4 square root of 5. Please check Plan Book for any additional assignments. And if your teacher has assigned anything, please do that at this time. Be prepared for class tomorrow. Thank you.